Happy Thursday, everybody. How's it going? And happy nearly St. Patty's Day. Max and I were just talking about upcoming events. He's more in the Twin Cities. I'm a little bit east of the Twin Cities, but I think St. Paul, Minnesota has a big St. Patrick's Day, lots of stuff going on. I grew up outside of Chicago, and the big thing there, Mayor Daley in that time frame. Vote early, vote often kind of thing. But they turned the river green. The Chicago River got turned green. I think they still do that, these many years later, but I don't know for sure. Speaking of St. Patty's Day and green, this is a complete coincidence, actually. We're going to turn something green today. We're going to turn some green epoxy. Yeah, I wish I had actually could say that I planned that, but I didn't. Oh, and I'm wearing a green shirt. That shook out all around, completely unintentionally. Here's the deal. I like turning. I like working with epoxy. So when we bring them together, that can mean turning epoxy on the lathe. If you have tried this, and I'm guilty of this, if you have tried this and you have done it with your standard out-of-the-box lathe chisels, you're going to get a closer look at these in a little bit, and had really bad frustration as a result. I know why. And the reason is, with epoxy, it's way different than turning a chunk of wood. The dynamic of turning epoxy is such that if you use your conventional lathe chisels, whether they're bowl chisels or spindle chisels, you're probably not going to get good results. And not only not get good results, but it could get scary and gross and icky and all sorts of stuff, because those chisels have a tendency to catch on the epoxy. And instead of getting a nice cut and easy to manage the cut, they tend to tear and chip, and all sorts of weird, bad stuff can happen. So the answer to this is simple. The answer to this is in the form of tooling, which is to switch from those conventional chisels to negative rake chisels. And I'm going to get you in tight here so that you can look more closely at what I'm talking about. But the negative rake cutters that I'm going to use, not only are they good for epoxy, they're also good for really hard woods. I meant to bring this in earlier. So this is something I'm working on. That's Indian rosewood. Indian rosewood is a really, really hard wood, and I'm working on kind of a vessel shape with this. I'm currently in the middle of hollowing the inside. All of this, because of the hardness of that rosewood, was done with negative rake chisels. So it's not just about epoxy. Now, a good question would be, how do we get to this point? I'm not, in this live, I'm not going to cover casting epoxy and all of that stuff. We've done that. So today's the download that's available for you today is, how do you get to here? The bottom line for me is, if I'm doing a project that calls for epoxy, I always have something nearby that I can put the excess in. In this case, it was just like a 12-ounce plastic cup. The download that you can get, if you scroll down a little bit on the page, when you click on that and grab the download, there's information about using the right epoxy as part of this. Casting resin versus tabletop versus penetrating epoxy. There's so much chemistry there. So the bottom line is to develop your turnings, to get to the point where you have something that can go on the lathe. Grab that download, and that's going to get you to here. Now, before I zoom, let me just check for any questions that might have come up so far. Okay, so let's look more closely at the whole tooling aspect. So there's a good look at my epoxy. Now, if you look closely at that, you'll see as we start turning, there are a few things going on here. There's mica powder inside there. That's going to give that a pretty neat kind of a luminescence as I turn it. There are also, you might be able to see it right there, there are pine cones in there. This is going to get turned into a knife handle. And as I turn this, of course, it's going to expose the pine cones. We're going to see more and more of the mica powder, and there's even some glitter in there. So it's going to be a pretty neat turning. So let's go back to what not to use. This is one of my bowl scrapers. More specifically, that's a 1/2 inch round nose scraper. So scraper because of the way that angle right there has been ground into that. So again, even if this is freshly sharpened, ready to go, the perfect tool for doing a wooden bowl, it's going to tend to catch badly on this epoxy. This is a 3/8 inch spindle gouge. So it's slightly dished right there. It's got an angle, a bevel ground onto it there. Same. If I come in, and even with a gentle approach, even with, even if my technique is good, the bottom line is this is not a good tool choice for what we're looking to do here. What we are going to use is this. This is a negative rake tool. So when you look at it, there's 2 bevels on here. There's one right there on the surface, beveled down that way. Then additionally, there's a bevel that comes up this way. It's that negative rake that's going to let us do the voodoo that we want to do here. I'm also going to be using this, same deal. That's still a negative rake, but it's a square instead of a round. So importantly, both of these chisels are sourced in the description for the video. So if you're looking to do epoxy and you like the way this goes, go to the description. The chisel is there, and importantly, the negative rake cutter is there as well. So you got to get the chisel and the negative rake in order for this to all come together. The round and the square are both listed there, are both linked for you. So a good question, a little diversion from the epoxy component is these are carbide insert lathe chisels. And I like these for a couple of reasons. When I'm teaching turning, even outside of working with epoxy, I start everybody with a scraping technique. And these excel at that scraping technique. With a carbide insert on a tool, you never have to sharpen this. When this side gets dull, we loosen a set screw, turn it, tighten the set screw, now you've exposed a fresh edge. So on this square one, you can do that. You've got an edge you'll start with, and then you can rotate it 3 times to fresh edges. When those are done, you throw that out, you put in a new one. On the round one, same concept. You loosen the bolt, loosen the set screw, turn it a little bit, fresh edge, turn it a little bit, fresh edge. When you've used it up, you just dispose of it and get a new one. Because it's carbide, it lasts where this is high-speed steel. Because these are carbide, they last a really, really, really long time. So one of the things at a beginning woodworking or a beginning turning level, a thing I like for people is that with this, you can really concentrate on your turning and not worry about sharpening. If you're gonna turn with conventional chisels, high-speed steel or tool steel, you definitely have to master sharpening techniques because you could easily sharpen those chisels. On a big bowl, I could sharpen 5-6 times before I'm completely done tooling the bowl. So sharpening is a key aspect to lathe turning, unless you're working with carbide chisels. So just in general as a category, I like the carbide, especially at an entry level of turning. For what we're doing with epoxy, I really like these carbide negative rake cutters. Now, I thought about this a lot. This being, do I want to go ahead and use one of those conventional chisels to show you why you don't want to use those? And I'm not gonna, because that philosophically for me with safety, I know other woodworkers do stuff where it's like, this is how this can go badly if you don't do it correctly. I don't like showing the negative. I like only showing the positive. So I don't want to show you a bad technique, which a bad technique would be using the wrong tools for the job. So I'm not gonna bring those conventional chisels to this. I'm not gonna take the risk of a catch. I'm not gonna take the risk of tearing that turning out of this four jaw chuck because of the severity of a catch. So you just got to trust me that those tools are a bad choice. These tools are a good choice. We're going to start with the round one. Once we get going, I'll get the cameras in tighter again. My voice is going to change because I'm going to put on a full face shield, as you should always do when you're turning on the lathe. And I guess I'll look for preguntas. And then if there aren't any, we'll just jump right in and I'll show you what these babies can do. Where'd they go? There they are. All right, nothing. All right, here's what we're looking at. I'm going to start with the round chisel, and generally at a roughing step, which is where I am right now, you're going to start with round. And the thing to watch for is, from a technique perspective, I'll be holding the chisel parallel to the floor. The tip of the cutter is about on the center line of my turning. And then watch for the amazing shavings that are going to will come off of this. This would be a wonderful time to be running a slow motion camera because these really cool curls are going to be coming off of the epoxy. But anyway, those nice shavings in woodworking, that tells you you're doing the right thing. If you're getting dust instead of shavings, the chisel probably isn't sharp or it's the wrong tool. So in turning, a good way to know, do I need to sharpen the chisel or do I need to rotate the cutter, is when I'm no longer getting those curls, the shavings, and I'm getting dust, then probably that's an indication that the tool isn't doing what it should do anymore. I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to start so that you can, I'm checking my monitor here. I'm going to start on this camera, the camera on right now, so you can kind of see the body mechanics of this, and then I'll bring you in closer so you can see the cut. Not just better, but more better. Maybe even way more better. All right, I think we're there. So, chisel parallel to the floor. I'm looking to just clean this up to start with. It's a little, like me, it's a little eccentric right now. So we got to get it round. So one thing you'll find is that with negative rake, they don't cut as aggressively as a conventional grind, which is what we want in this application. If this was cutting as aggressively, we'd probably be catching on the epoxy and tearing chunks of it out. So as I'm doing this, as I'm cleaning this up, our cut is happening a little more slowly than it would if I had a conventional chisel, but that's okay, because it's given me great cut quality in the epoxy. Just increased my RPM a little. There you can start to see those curls. All right, let me get you in where you can see better. Right there. Again, the curls are so nice coming off of this. Pretty well rounded at this point. Not me, but the turning. Although I think I'm pretty well rounded too, but. And then with the other profile, it's just going to give me different options. So when I come to the square tip, and this one is actually, it's not completely square, it's slightly domed. I like that for the step we're at here. So part of what this profile helps me do is, by virtue of its shape, rounded, when I do this, it's quite possible I'm creating highs and lows in that cylinder. When I come back with this tool, I can ride the highs and lows and get that to be a more consistent, basically establishing a straight line across here as I'm cutting to level out those highs and lows. Let me do a couple finishing passes here, just like cleanup passes. And then I'll get you back in the camera so you can see the cut quality, and we'll see if any of those pine cones are showing. I'm going to get a little more material off of there first. All right, clean that up a little. Let's see what we see. So pretty, this is going to be pretty cool when it's all set. Right there, that's a pine cone. And that's a pine cone. And that's a pine cone. So what's going to happen as I continue with this is a little tenon's going to get shaped here. That's going to fit into the knife blank. And then up here, this is going to get shaped to be a handle. And as I cut into it, as I continue to cut into it, I'm going to expose more and more of these pine cones. And then two, you might be able to just see here some of the effect of having the mica powder in there, which gives it that cool swirl, a little bit of luminescence as it goes. And that'll be more and more evident as when I get done and this is polished back up to a high gloss like it is down here, that luminescence will be even more and more obvious. The bottom line out of this is that, like many things, you want to make sure you're picking the right tool for the job. And in this case, turning epoxy, you really want to make sure that negative rake is the way to go. As another example, this bowl is here. So this one that's a mix, obviously, of epoxy that was cast with wood with a burl in it, but that whole thing was turned with a negative rake chisel. And waiting just for I just got to finish sanding it and then polish it, and that'll be done. And to back up to where we started, if you want to know how to create these blanks or these blanks, grab that download that we have available, which is going to cover the aspect of prepping your parts. And I've said it a billion times when we talk about epoxy. Talk about choosing the right tool for the job. With your epoxy, you got to make sure you're choosing the right epoxy for the job. Tabletop epoxy that we would cover a table with to protect it is a significantly different product than casting resin, which is a way different product than penetrating epoxy. So you really want to make sure you grab that download so that you understand how to get to this point. And cure time is huge and varies from product to product. So grab that PDF. One of the things in your turnings that epoxy is a little bit different from other stuff, or just in your woodworking in general, which is when this is done, it'll get sanded and polished. I won't put finish on it. So it'll get buffed to a point where it's glossy again, and that'll get that sheen out of it. So a couple questions about RPMs, about RPM. I am currently, let me just click it on. I'm currently running at about 800. Now that it's round, I'd be happy to dial that up to 1200 or something like that. Andy says he's got a conventional negative rake chisel. He says, when I sharpen, do I do both sides on the wheel? So he ground a negative rake onto, it sounds like a conventional chisel, and yes, I would hit both bevels. Edward says, looks like the tool is bouncing. Is that just a trait of the epoxy? It's just not quite round yet. So as I continue to cylinderize this, is that a verb? I just made it a verb. As it continues to get more and more cylindrical, that is going to come out, and I'll turn into a more uniform pass from end to end. It's still just a little bit eccentric on the lathe right now. That's why that looks like that's happening. So while I'm waiting to see if there are any more questions, I will remind you that today is Thursday, which means, and it's the second Thursday of the month, which means today at 4 o'clock is the general Q&A, the open Q&A. So 4 o'clock Central Time, be here or be square. And that's when, for an hour, I try to just answer as many of your woodworking questions as I can. The other thing I want to remind you of, I've talked about this in other lives, in April, we're not doing the Q&A on the second Thursday of the month. It's further back in the month. It's like the 24th or 25th. Watch your email. I'm going to have a guest here, Rob Johnstone, who you may know as the editor of Woodworkers Journal magazine, is going to be in the shop with me for the Thursday live in April. Not today's, a little over a month from now. He's going to be here for that Q&A. So that's going to be a really good one. Rob is more hand tool savvy than I am. He's a trained luthier, which is not a religion. That's an instrument maker. And he's got, so Max put it on the comments here. The April Q&A is the 25th. So the timing is a little different than normal, but still at 4 o'clock Central Time. So again, watch your email for that. But that's going to be a really good one. Rob, good friend of mine and a very, very, very knowledgeable woodworker. So it'll be fun to have him in the shop. All right, I'm going to cruise again. So a couple reminders as we rock on here. Looks like questions are done. One, if you want these specific chisels, they are sourced for you in the description that comes with this live stream. Two, don't try to fight through it and use regular grind chisels on epoxy. It's not going to go well. Ask me how I know. Three, don't forget that you can grab that PDF, and that's going to help you get to this point where you have a casting, you have a thing that you can put on the lathe in order to make stuff. And then for 4 o'clock today, Central Time, it's kind of like Mickey Mouse thing. Never mind. I'm so easily distracted. 4 o'clock Central Time today is the general Q&A, and I'll be sitting over there, hopefully answering your questions. Okay. Questions seem to be taken care of. Thanks very much for watching the live stream. And for those of you who come back, I will see you later today at 4 bells.